Who are the intended users? When reviewing appraisals, it's important to consider the question, who are the intended users? This question is more subtle than most people think.
The range of people who use personal property appraisals varies from bankers, financial institutions, liquidators, through to tax lawyers and accountants. In this video, we'll focus on those who take financial risks. These are usually the lending and leasing institutions, those who are trying to assess how much financial risk they can take against specific personal property assets.
In the appraisal world, intended users are a very specific group of people. When reviewing an appraisal, it is important to ensure that you are one of these specific intended users. This means the appraiser has written the appraisal with your requirements in mind. If you are not one of the intended users, great care must be exercised as the appraisal report has been written to the requirements of others.
Every appraisal should list the intended users by name or class. If you're a listed intended user, the appraiser will have contacted you to ensure that he's working with your specific requirements in mind. This would have involved agreeing to a definition of value, the extent of asset identification, the effective date, and the type of report to be provided. Even if the client is paying for the appraisal, the requirements of the primary intended user, usually the lending institution, are of paramount importance for the appraisal to be usable.
If the intended use of the report is similar to your requirements, then you need to focus on certain specific requirements that the appraiser has utilized. The first of these is the definition of value. The definition will contain detail which can substantially affect the opinion of value that the appraiser provides. A close examination of this definition is important to ensuring that the report is relevant to your requirements. Variation in definitions can be quite subtle, but produce widely varying results. For example, fair market value in place is very different from fair market value in continuing use, yet many personal property appraisers would be hard-pressed to explain the difference.
When considering distressed value, the distress component, that is the time for the transaction to close, can greatly affect the opinion of value. It's also common to see forced liquidation values provided when auction data for this class of assets is not available. The next component to pay attention to is the effective date. The effective date is different from the report date. They may be the same, and if the dates are fairly current, the appraisal may be relevant. If the effective date and the report date vary widely, the appraisal is usually being written for some other intended use, which is not compatible with asset-based lending. If the effective date has passed by more than a reasonable period of time, the appraisal may no longer be relevant. What constitutes a reasonable period of time is determined by the class of assets involved.
Another important component of an appraisal report is the extraordinary assumptions and hypothetical conditions. These come about during the appraisal process and identify the limitations that the appraiser encountered during the appraisal process. For example, these can include the extent to which the appraiser was able to inspect the assets. These can render the appraisal of little value. If a client has brought you an appraisal in which you are not an intended user, take the time to call the appraiser and discuss the appraisal. A reputable appraiser will have a work file on every appraisal and be willing to discuss the report's conclusions. A trusted, independent second opinion is always worth a small investment. Call us.